Thank you for joining us for today's Ipsos Foresight webinar, featuring new data and interviews with industry experts exploring the future of farming and what it means for a wide range of products, services, and the sectors that produce them, from tech to restaurants and CPG to auto and air travel. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Matt Carmichael, editor of What the Future. Matt, you have the floor.
Hey everybody, welcome. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge and thank Kate MacArthur, who has been promoted to managing editor of What the Future. She is the reason we keep these issues coming out on time in your inbox, and I quite literally could not do this without her. So congrats, Kate. Now, I have a prediction, which isn't something futurists generally make, but I feel comfortable that, at least for the near-term future, every single one of your customers, clients, patients, voters, and audience members will eat food. This is a bold prediction, I know. Not only that, but much of that food will be farmed or rely on products that are farmed. It's kind of fundamental to our entire way of life, going back to the dawn of what we considered a civilization, when we stopped merely hunting and gathering and put down roots, literal and proverbial, so we could start growing grains. Some theories say that we started growing those grains so we could brew beer, which would seem to indicate that you cannot have civilization without beer. But I digress. Today's episode isn't about the past of farming, it's about the future. There's so much to consider for a wide range of products and services and sectors, from the tech to restaurants and grocery, CPG, auto, air travel, think biofuels. And there are lessons here about technology adoption that you might find unexpected, and CX and UX. But we live in a world of growing population in some areas, plateauing population in others, and challenging climates all over the world. Farming has always been an industry dependent on both climate and weather, which has put agriculture at the forefront of dealing with climate change. Couple that with technical advances and geopolitical shifts, and you've got an ever-challenging world for today's farmer, one of whom we spoke to in this issue. And by farmer, I don't mean me. My dad's favorite dad joke was, why did the farmer win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. And this is me standing in my field. It's a small farm I inherited when I was a kid that's been in my family for several generations. How it got to my family is a typical American story in all of the good and bad ways. I visited twice, and if I look out of place, it's because I am. While my people, some of them, might have been farmers, I am not. But I got a guy. Instead, I grew up photographing farm aid shows with Neil Young and Willie Nelson, chanting pro-farmer slogans and making music with their friends. But again, I digress. So today, we'll talk about tech with a major maker of farm equipment. And we'll talk from some of the biggest names in food production, like Cargill and Tyson Ventures and Ocean Spray, and some of the smallest, a family farmer from Montana. And of course, we'll pepper in lots of data on people's attitudes and tensions growing in the space. Nothing less than our ability to feed ourselves and the rest of humanity is at stake. So, no biggie. Let's dive in. There are two basic schools of thought about climate change. We can modify how we do things now and try to stave off the worst of it, or we can adapt to climate that is changing. And of course, the correct answer is yes, both. I spoke with investor Kevin Van Trump, who is bullish on the future of farming and technology, topics he covers in his must-read newsletter. While many are worried about impending food shortages globally, he makes a case for why that won't happen. He says, as humans, we've done a crazily good job always overcoming complications and problems when they arise, he says. He sees some adaptation playing out already. He says, you go back 10 or 12 years, and it didn't seem like we were seeing nearly as much corn growing in the Dakotas. Now it's a lot less wheat and a lot more corn, he says. A lot of my friends are farmers who are older, and they talk about how much it's changed in just their lifetimes with dramatic shifts in the soil, he says. So he thinks that with these dramatic shifts, the tech coming to market and everything from autonomous equipment to gene editing tools like CRISPR to seed technology will keep us fed for a long time to come. But it's more of an open question as to who exactly will do that feeding. Whether your business, whatever your business, the future of farming will impact it, and you, driven by changing climate and changing consumers. Solutions are abundant for both adapting and mitigating. We just need them to grow and scale. So here's what we're going to cover today. We are going to look at the future of farming from a number of different lenses, and we do this for every issue. It's essentially a foresight exercise called domain map, and we look at the territory around the future of farming broadly. So obviously, we're going to talk about climate change, and we're going to talk about land uses and resources. We're going to talk about how we take some of the solutions that are happening and scale them to feed an entire global population all day, every day. We're going to talk about the science that's happening around this, about synthetic biology. We'll touch on a little bit of robots and vertical farming. We'll talk about the actual farming equipment and the implements that they use to harvest, so agricultural tech and farming Internet of Things. And finally, we'll look at the world in terms of corporatization and regulation. Regulation, that's kind of a fun word. I might use that again. And we'll think about all of the different changes that are happening in the legislative landscape, as well as the farming landscape itself. And as always, when we do this, we will think about it in the terms of the Ipsos theories of change. So we think about all of these things as we are doing a trends and foresight project, whether that's something like editorial foresight, as we do with What the Future, where we think about the future of a topic broadly, or whether it's for a client engagement, where we're thinking about a specific scenarios or a specific set of scenarios around a challenge that you may be having in your business. And these are slightly different things with different outcomes. When we're planning What the Future issue, we think about it as broadly as we can to make it interesting to a wide variety of readers. But when we're doing it for clients, it's a much tighter engagement where we're looking at a specific problem, again, with your business or sector. So we think about the macro forces, the huge tectonic plates that are kind of underlying everything, that are moving and shifting the future. Sometimes slowly, sometimes they happen over decades, sometimes they happen very slowly until something causes them, some sort of shock causes them to accelerate quickly. That can be things like climate change that we'll talk about. Over on the right, we think about the signals, the things that we see in the news every day that give us some hint about a future to come. We don't necessarily know what it means when we see it, but our little futurist spidey sense starts to tingle, and we know that it's going to mean something, or at least we suspect. And in the center, always at the heart of everything we do at Ipsos, is the humans. We think about the shifts that we're seeing in society, in markets, and people. And again, this isn't the end product. This is all the beginning work that we do, whether we're talking about trends or talking about foresight. And that leads us into another thing that we like to think about, which is how do consumers deal with the future and what kind of needs are they going to have? And we do this with a framework that was developed by my colleague Trevor Sedano in Strategy 3. And he took a traditional jobs to be done framework, which suggests that we don't buy things to buy them, but we are hiring products and services to do a job for us. And he wanted to spin that a little bit into the future and imagine scenarios and imagine worlds in the future and think about what kind of jobs we will need to hire products for in that future. So in the future for farming, he thinks about how humans are hardwired to survive, and food and water are essential needs. In a future where these basics become scarce and difficult to access, we may turn inward to prioritize our individual needs versus the needs of the collective. So we can imagine a world where small coastal town residents either join mass migration toward inland freshwater lakes or fight inwardly after losing battles with corporations who bought up local water rights. We'll talk about that a lot more in a little bit. And in this world, Sophie Washington actually authored this particular version for the farming issue. She sees several future jobs to be done about helping us access water to survive and thrive, or helping people live in harmony within their community, or helping defend their rights to food and water. And so these are all things that lead us to think about products and services that we'll need to start working on innovating in order to get us to the futures that might be coming for us. In terms of where we stand in the world, we'll touch on just a little bit of data about this before we keep going. And the world's food system faces a growing dual threat. The first is something that people can't control, and the second is one they can. So according to Ipsos Global Trends, most people around the world would agree that there will be more extreme weather events in their country in 2023 than last year. If reality matches expectations, once-in-a-generation floods, droughts, and other catastrophes could wipe out the crops that feed nations and the world. As these events happen more frequently and more intensely, Americans are more concerned about their environment than many of their global peers. But an equally large threat is the disruption of world citizens of climate science. The distrust of world citizens of climate science. 8 in 10 people globally think scientists don't even know what they're talking about on environmental issues. Americans are more trusting than global citizens, but with 69% still sharing this sentiment, that's of little comfort. In the US, climate change is one of the most divisive issues, and that could stymie new research funds in the 2023 Farm Bill renewal. But let's head back to the US and talk to some of the people who are shaping the future of farming and for farming. Feeding people requires immense amount of water, whether to irrigate crops, nourish livestock, or process all those source ingredients into the foods that people eat. Yet few people know that farming is one of the most water-demanding industries. But as the climate bakes the planet, farmers and food producers want agriculture to be part of the solution, and they're doing more with less and to restoring freshwater resources. That's a major focus for Pilar Cruz, the Chief Sustainability of Cargill, one of the world's largest food ingredient suppliers. She says, the more we can use our position at the center of the world's agricultural supply chain to bring companies, governments, and NGOs together, the more we can scale effective solutions. That's a theme you're going to hear a lot today. Such an effort takes corporate cooperation and innovation. Water, with land use, climate, and people are among Cargill's top sustainability priorities. Since its significant role at the center of the food supply chain and a footprint that spans 70 countries, Cargill connects partners, stakeholders, customers, and NGOs to develop and implement agriculture-driven solutions for conserving and restoring water, says Cruz. Some regenerative agriculture practices use cover crops to protect the soil rather than for harvesting, and sustainable grazing to help retain water in the soil. Cargill is also investing in more efficient irrigation systems, which use sensors to track humidity, measure the sun's intensity, and identify the best times to irrigate. Early results suggest that this system can save 30 to 50% of the total amount of water use in irrigation while improving yield. She says irrigation is just one part of these solutions needed. And here's what she told WTF Managing Editor, Kate MacArthur.
Regenerative Ag as one of the programs that we are very optimistic about because we have seen clear benefits, tangible benefits, both from a climate perspective, but also water restoration. From a technology perspective, we are excited about more efficient irrigation systems, and we have a program in place with corn farmers in Mexico, in the Sonora and Sinaloa states, both states that are deprived, if you will, from high quality water. And we have seen such an amazing improvement from a water perspective. So by implementing these improved, more efficient irrigation systems, the farmers in Sinaloa and Sonora have seen a reduction in water use by 30 to 50%, and that is huge.
She says that part of the solution is partnering with NGOs as well as the customers. We all have a role to play, she says, and no one can go it alone. Meanwhile, debates are raging over the topic of land, both its designated use for farming, energy, preservation, reparations, as well as its ownership, public versus private, foreign versus domestic. We'll get into that more as we go today. What's certain is that these choices will have potentially drastic implications at home and abroad. The COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine highlight the need for securing domestic resources of energy, food, and supplies as a key element of national security strategy. However, we lack consensus on the right mix and prioritization. At the same time, aging farmers expect to transfer millions of acres in the coming decades, and younger farmers say they lack access to the available land due to rising competition. Looking ahead, we can anticipate energy independence and transitions away from fossil fuels to start impeding more on arable land. Adding to the debate are calls to return land to native tribes and to give descendants of formerly enslaved people, a prospect that is often split among party lines. While these issues will continue to play out, Ipsos data makes it clear that people across the spectrum are thinking America first, says Trevor Sedano, a foresight lead at Ipsos Strategy 3. So how do you feed the world sustainably in an increasingly climate-stressed planet? Tyson Foods, one of the world's largest food companies and recognized leader in the protein through its brands like Tyson, Hillshire Farm, and Jimmy Dean's, sees innovation as the answer. Rahul Ray is Senior Director and Investment Lead at Tyson Ventures, the company's venture capital arm. His team is exploring innovation, AI, and other technologies to produce more proteins for more people sustainably. Over the next 30 years, Ray expects the world to add 2 billion more people, which will require finding ways to produce more high-quality food sustainably and affordably for a changing population in evolving population centers. That means innovation, not just conventional protein, but also alternative proteins. Then it's a matter of getting those products to people. The food industry has a unique supply chain issue because it can't flex up or down based on demand like other sectors, he says. He sees alternative proteins are part of a solution, sensing a theme here, but we also need people to buy in. He spoke with managing editor Kate MacArthur.
We've looked at plant-based. We've invested in plant-based. We were early investors in Beyond Meat way back when. We invested in cell-cultured meat. We invested in mushroom-based. We look at all forms of protein. So absolutely it's important. The question that we have to ask, not just us, but the whole industry is, how do you separate the mission versus the business models? One of the questions was the alternative protein versus conventional protein. I consider that to be the mission question, right? Is how do we have different forms of protein that does not require us to use conventional protein? But then you have the business model, which is how do you produce protein that is healthy for the consumer, that can be produced at scale and can be affordable? Because the consumers care about three things. They care about price, they care about taste, and they care about personal health. So you have to be able to address those. It's only so much you can get a consumer to pay up for on the basis of a mission if it's a consumer staple and you have to pay a premium for it, right? So big picture, absolutely need alternate proteins. If you click down, how do you take it from a mission that is something that is, from a versus conventional protein to how do you make a viable business model?
It's estimated that 18.8 million Americans live in a food desert, an area with limited access to affordable, nutritious food. This gap, driven by income inequality, systemic racism, and other inequalities, can have long-lasting impacts on health and general well-being. Ipsos research finds that Americans affected by food deserts are enthusiastic about some solutions. Community-based proposals like opening new grocery stores are popular, but people are split on other ideas like delivery services or government subsidies. Regardless of the strategy, companies need to increase awareness and support healthy lifestyles, says Manuel Garcia Garcia, the global lead of neuroscience at Ipsos. As the head of research, development, and sustainability at Ocean Spray, Katie Gale is paying close attention to what people want from their food. Once a snack was just a snack. Now Americans expect healthy benefits, sustainability, and more from each bite. But while synthetic biology can bring those benefits, many Americans distrust GMOs. Gale believes that traditional horticulture can deliver the healthier, more fruitful, and tastier options that people crave. Farmers are under pressure to increase yields and minimize costs. But Gale believes the future of sustainable, affordable, and flavorful food lies at the intersection of conventional agriculture and unconventional thinking. People may demand cheap, shelf-stable sweet snacks, but Gale is confident that out-of-the-box innovation can help farmers and food manufacturers meet those needs without genetic modification, whether by repurposing familiar ingredients or developing new recipes. She thinks that in the future, the most important innovations won't change what we eat, but how we cultivate and harvest it in the first place. Here's what she told our staff writer, Christopher Good.
All these technologies are so important, and health benefits, taste benefits, cost and use, consumer labeling, all of those play a really important role. And you may have heard about our partnership with Amai Proteins, for example, and they're working on some new sweetener technology, which is super cool, and I'm really excited. And again, this is just another tool in the toolbox that we're working with and exploring on how we can apply it to our product portfolio. At the end of the day, it's all about delivering great taste, but also that nutrient-dense product that consumers are looking for. And it's a balancing act, right? And unfortunately, there is no magic bullet. And typically what I find is really looking for those synergistic formula blends, whether it's a blend of nutrients or other ingredients that can deliver the functionality of the beverage while also delivering the great taste for consumers.
Think Teslas are high tech? You should see the cabin of today's combines and tractors. Farming technology often leads the way for more consumer uses. Where farm tech is today and how it is changing the way we feed America, Seth Crawford from ag equipment manufacturer AGCO gives us the lay of the land. Farmers have been using GPS for decades to get the most yield out of every inch of their land. The combination of tech and ag is only increasing. Farming machines today are quieter, which creates less stress on nearby livestock. They're safer, with better filtration so farmers aren't breathing fertilizer and other chemicals. They're faster, and speed matters when you're making 80 passes a day on your field. And they're more sustainable, reducing chemical use while increasing yield. All industries can benefit from the lesson AGCO learns in ag design, says Crawford. He grew up on a farm himself and knows firsthand, and from his customers, how technology can improve the experience if it's done right. Here's what he told me.
I grew up on a farm, and I remember well what it's like. You're driving across the farm field prior to technology at the level we had today, and it's dusty. The sun's coming at you, depending on what time of the day it is. It's hard to see the other end of the field. You're trying to drive straight. You're gripping that wheel tighter. You're turning around to look what's going on behind you. Now with the sensors that we have, the automation we have, it's dramatically easier on the operator. And so we're seeing farmers go much later in life operating at a very high level, and they love it. And they would never let you take that technology away. So it's somewhat counterintuitive. A lot of times they think, oh, the tech is just for the young ones in the industry. Absolutely not. I know plenty of 80-year-old farmers that are fully decked out with their technology. We've got to make it easy to use. And that's what actually, if you look at the adoption curves, when you make it easy to use and you have good support, when they do have a question, you're going to see that adoption take off. When it's not easy to use or the reliability is not quite right, we see a very slow take rate, or we see it hit a brick wall and it just stops because they give up on it.
Breakthroughs in AI and machine learning are already boosting agriculture innovation, from autonomous tractors to sensors that gather data for sustainability practices. But in the years to come, this technological shift could also transform the consumer end of the supply chain. Imagine going to your local store wearing augmented reality smart glasses, or visiting a virtual store with virtual reality. As you pick up a food item, your device displays information related to the sustainability of the food source, rates its fit with your wellness goals, and shows a quick rundown of recipes. The potential applications are broad, and many shoppers are interested. New research conducted by Ipsos Innovation reveals that 1 in 2 Americans are interested in leveraging AI algorithms that analyze their preferences, habits, behavior, health and wellness goals to offer personalized recommendations, says Christo van der Walt, a vice president in Ipsos's innovation practice. By understanding people and the information they need about sustainability, nutrition, and affordability, brands can improve the shopping experience and earn customer loyalty. It would be remiss to talk about the future of farming and not talk to a farmer. So I called one I've known for a long time. Dale's got a way to go before he retires, but he personally sees a lot of the benefits that Seth Crawford describes. He told me about how much less his hands hurt due to automated steering after a 14 to 16-hour day driving a piece of equipment, making 80 passes on his land at 4.5 miles an hour. But Hansen knows well the challenges facing the industry that has supported his family for generations. Some challenges are local and specific to the regions of Montana. Some aren't. He feels the effects of globalization personally, but he's also fortunate not to be affected by some of the key challenges. Hansen is hopeful about his own farm, although he sees clouds around farming's future in general. Because farming demands skills that are learned over time, finding workers is an ongoing challenge, he says. His 3 adult daughters are taking over and expanding the farm. However, they, like his wife, have other jobs to make ends meet. Not all farmers have another generation interested in staying on the farm, and not all farmers can afford to pass their land, where most of their wealth is, to their kids. Foreign investors looking to secure irrigation rights are driving up prices, he says. A phrase he uses a lot is cash poor but land rich, and this upsets that dynamic. He sees if everybody's getting ready to retire, they probably don't have a lot of money saved, but they have a lot of value in their land, and they only have one opportunity to sell it, so they're going to maximize that. He worries about the impact if those sales aren't going to the next generation of farmers, but investors willing to outbid other buyers. It's not just prices either. One of the things that's changing about farming is the relationship to who owns the land versus who farms the land. And in terms of changes just to the future of the specific role of farming, that's likely one of the biggest changes we're going to see. And again, I say this as someone who owns and rents out a farm from afar. But here's what he told me when we caught up.
There's a small niche of people around that are, I want to say, land hungry, and they just want to farmland to farmland or control land. There's small niche, from what I'm seeing, an outsider looking, and this is just all my perspective is, there's a small group of farmers that's okay with farming land for investors. And so a lot of times these people will farm this land, and these investors aren't in it to make money. They just want to be able to control the land for whatever reason. And a lot of this ground that these investors are getting is on irrigated ground. And call me the conspiracy theorist, whatever. These people are controlling this irrigated land, and hence they control the water. And any more water is such a precious commodity. In these irrigation projects, when you control the water, you kind of control the outlook of there, because you control this and you have such an interest in it. And so from what we're seeing, there's a group of people that are buying stuff and they're okay with farming it for foreign investors, and whether they're farming it because they cannot get the finances to buy it and they're just want a farmland or what.
One of the things we pay attention to is the role of humans in the future. Our opinions matter. And if opinion moves one way or another, policy could follow, or it could disregard that, which leads to another kind of tension, right? The handy thing when it comes to foresight is that these are data points we can measure over time. Their shifts, or lack of shifts, could point us to one potential future or another. So we have 5 tensions to consider today. Tension 1. Technology can only do so much for farming. We have yet to imagine crops that don't require any water. Water shortages are not an easy problem to solve, and we could certainly hit a future where we have widespread, massive restrictions on water for personal use. Luckily, we might be ready to escape these, at least in the abstract. This tension could easily move if the choice were water for my lawn. One worrying aspect is that there can be no one-size-fits-all approach. Pilar Cruz from Cargill says, "We have consistently adopted a local approach to this global crisis because water challenges are so different from place to place." Tension 2, convenience or sustainability. Sustainability is on the upswing. When we asked about this tension a year ago, the split was 67 to 33. Now it's 59 to 41. That's a noticeable shift. But while this tension is becoming tighter, Rahul Ray, Senior Director of Investments from Tyson Ventures, thinks industry will have to make it easier for people to avoid having to choose between convenience and sustainability. It's really a question, he says, of and, not or. We're investing on the protein production side, not just conventional protein, but alternative proteins, he says. Then how do you get the protein produced to the customer? That's a whole supply chain problem. And finally, they look at this in terms of how they do that in the context of sustainability. Tension 3, Do we trust nature or science? Trust is a tricky thing, especially when it comes to something as ill-defined as the term natural. Is a synthetic ingredient with the same genetic profile as the quote natural version equal or different in a customer's mind? It's clear that natural alone isn't going to feed the world sustainably. Science needs to be more involved. That said, creating products and scaling them are two different problems. Ocean Spray's Katie Gale says that we need to be cognizant of that. It's an important role for R&D to vet these technologies, but also to stick with them as they scale and evolve. Tension 4, supporting family farms or industrial farms. And this is a bit of a false tension, but it reflects a dynamic many think is in play. Today, there's often little difference between family farms and corporate farms. Farms, even those controlled by families, have been getting bigger and are often contracted out to big agriculture producers. Sometimes the farmers don't even own the land. The pandemic put our food sources and supply chains more in the spotlight. So as people learn more about this industry, will these lines blur and will the public support shift or maybe even dry up? Farmer Dale Hansen worries that changing dynamics will hurt farming and family farmers. He says, you tend to take things more seriously and do a better job of it for the simple fact that it's your land. These bigger farms, he says, it all kind of turns into big business. And finally, tension 5, funding from government or business. Most people think the government should have a role in funding sustainable farming practices more than businesses. But we've met government. Funding often comes with a string attached, regulation. AGCO's Seth Crawford thinks that sustainability efforts are working so well that farmers will be required to comply and prove them. He says, we're going to see a regulatory environment where farmers have to document operations, and that's going to require certain technology because it's proving to be much more sustainable. He sees AGCO's role as making that easier by having the equipment streamline the reporting of how that equipment is being used. So maybe this tension becomes less tense as businesses and government efforts support rather than conflict with each other. So where does that leave us in the future? Where are we and where could we wind up? Here are a couple plausible ports on our journey. So in one, imagine it's 2033. The Hoover Dam is in danger. The future of almond farming is too. But people catch on to the urgency of the water and climate crisis. Turns out that having a well-watered lawn and a lush golf course aren't the only kind of landscape available. Water restrictions that in 2023 were mostly theoretical start to turn into actual policy proposals, which turn into regulation, which turns into case law. But eventually people decide to actually prioritize farmland for the increasing precious resource of water, once thought to be infinite and abundant. It literally falls from the sky for free, until it doesn't. But we adapt. Replacing grass in our yards decreases our dependence on water and helps return some biodiversity and pollinators. We learn from South Africa how to bring ourselves back from the brink with changes big and small, like even shortening our showers. In South Africa, they had a whole campaign where they had singers, popular singers in the area, create 2-minute long songs that you could listen to in the shower, and that was how long you were supposed to spend under the water. Science and technology can help too. We lean into vertical farms that help shorten the supply chain and bring more food closer to the communities that eat them. We move past today's better pesticides into small robots with lasers that remove weeds but don't harm crops or ecosystems. Those are in the works now. Immigration restrictions loosen as policy makers catch up to the fact that as the geography of farming follows the water as climate changes, the mobility of skilled farm labor needs to be prioritized. It also turns out that the threat to widespread hunger can be a motivator for all sides to work together. So what if things change, right? The poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote an oddly prescient line, "Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink." He was talking about being stranded in the ocean surrounded by salt water in the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, but it could apply to our future as well. Coasts may be overwhelmed with ocean, but inland might go dry. Too much water in the wrong places, none of it useful. Today, people overwhelmingly say they prioritize water for farming over water for other uses like watering lawns and golf courses. It's been reasonable to think that because such restrictions haven't really been a permanent part of our reality yet. But we're hurtling toward a future where that's going to be one of many things that need to be done if we want to keep growing food. So what happens when governments big, federal, and small local and even homeowners associations start coming for your grass or your lush 18th green, then growing food will seem more abstract and harder to support. 2023's multi-state drama about proportioning the water from the Colorado River may be just the start. The state-level restrictions will certainly trickle down to the individuals soon and continue. Which could lead us to a different future, that it's 2023 and it's dry, like Dust Bowl dry, but wider spread. While occasional periods of overwhelming deluges occur, as the West Coast saw happen in 2022 and 2023, a boom-bust cycle of water doesn't resolve long drought reductions. The world doesn't move fast enough on desalination technology to convert seawater into fresh water, nor on finding ways to collect and store water when it does rain in big bursts. All of this sounds bad, but here's what's worse. I should stop writing tongue twisters for myself. Shadowy shell corporations, foreign nation states, private equity, and wealthy individuals spent the 2020s quietly buying up any parcel of land adjacent to the supply of fresh water as they could. As a result, this gave the government fewer protective levers to pull, assuming there even was political will to use them. When regulations and restrictions are proposed, grassroots organizations pop up to fight for their right to keep the great American lawn. Water is the new oil. New cartels bloom. And that makes it harder for farmers to buy land. It becomes more costly to do just about anything because water rights have become a more expensive commodity. And the climate shifts the center of gravity for where food producers can farm and ranchers can sustain livestock. This is already happening today, and it's accelerating. Farmers long move away from small family enterprises to larger industrial conglomerates accelerates. Food costs inevitably rise despite all that industry does to improve yield and sustainability efforts. Misinformation efforts make us distrust scientific advancements that could help mitigate all these problems. This does not end well. But there are two roads we could go down and a guidepost along the way. But how do we avoid the second scenario? It will take intention, and that's why we do this. Because when you imagine possible tomorrows, when you take yourself out of your quarterly earnings statement, when you start to think about the industries around you and not just your own space, when you take a foresight lessons to what you're doing, and therefore when you imagine possible tomorrows, you're going to ask better questions today. You will do better research. You will look at broader solutions. You will think about how all of these things work together and what these different futures could look like and how you get to the future you want to see for yourself, for your community, for your company. And you'll start to think about the kind of products and services you need to be innovating to get to that future you want, and start to think about what the customer experience in that space will look like and what the user experience will look like and how you'll do the creative and how you'll do the messaging around that. And so it all comes back to why we need to think about the future, not only as foresight projects to do the imagining of that future, but of all the research you have to get to that future. And that's why we're here, and that's why we do What the Future. And we do it every month on a different topic. You can reach all of our issues at future.ipsos.com. You can subscribe to our free newsletter, which drops just once a month and takes you through the issue. We'll be back next month with the future of gender, a topic we visited in 2023, right as the pandemic was 2020, right as the pandemic was starting, and we thought was ripe for another issue. So we'll be back next month with that issue. We will have a webinar about that as well in mid-June, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks so much for joining this webinar. We'll send out the recording soon, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Matt Carmichael, and this is What the Future.